Despite the challenges, Nathan found support in unexpected places. Several of Trevor Wallace's former associates, disgruntled by years of mistreatment and betrayal, came forward with valuable information. One of them, a high-level executive who had recently left Wallace Enterprises, provided crucial evidence that Trevor had been involved in insider trading for years. The executive, tired of living in fear of Trevor's wrath, agreed to testify against him in court. This was the break Nathan needed. With a key witness ready to testify and mountains of evidence piling up, their case against Trevor grew stronger by the day. The media frenzy around the Kingston family began to die down as the focus shifted back to Trevor and his increasingly desperate attempts to salvage his crumbling empire. Nathan felt a sense of vindication. After years of suffering in silence, he was finally starting to see justice take shape. But he knew the battle wasn't over yet. Trevor Wallace was a dangerous man, and as the walls closed in on him, Nathan feared what his enemies might do next. Trevor Wallace, backed into a corner by the lawsuits and the mounting evidence against him, began to show signs of desperation. His empire, once untouchable, was crumbling before his eyes. Investors were pulling out, his business partners were abandoning him, and his name was being dragged through the mud in the media. For a man as powerful and ruthless as Trevor, the thought of losing everything was unbearable. Desperate to salvage his reputation and empire, Trevor decided to play dirty, dirtier than ever before. He contacted several corrupt politicians and influential figures with whom he had long-standing ties. In exchange for their silence or support, he promised them lucrative business deals and favors. His goal was to manipulate the legal system and stop the lawsuits from progressing. He knew that if the lawsuits reached the courtroom, he would be finished. But if he could use his influence to delay or dismiss the charges, he might be able to regroup and strike back at the Kingstons with full force. Trevor also began to reach out to criminal elements he had worked with in the past. He wasn't just planning a legal counterattack anymore. He was contemplating something far more dangerous. If Nathan and his family continued to threaten his empire, Trevor would make sure they paid dearly for it, even if it meant resorting to violence. He had crossed lines before, and now he was prepared to cross the final line. Nathan's intuition told him that Trevor wouldn't give up easily, but even he wasn't prepared for what came next. Late one night, while reviewing documents with Mr. Donovan, Nathan received an anonymous message on his phone. The message contained a chilling warning: back off or there will be consequences. You don't know what you're dealing with? Nathan's blood ran cold. He knew immediately that the message was from Trevor or someone close to him. It was a clear threat, and it meant that Trevor was preparing to escalate the conflict. Nathan showed the message to his father and Mr. Donovan, who both agreed that they needed to be cautious. The Wallace family had a long history of using intimidation to get their way, and now that Trevor was desperate, there was no telling how far he would go. The Kingston family tightened security around their estate and offices, and Nathan's movements were kept under close watch. They hired additional private security to ensure that no one could get close to them. But even with the added protection, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Trevor Wallace was not a man who made idle threats. As tensions mounted, Nathan received an unexpected visit from someone he hadn't seen in years: Helena Wallace. Despite their bitter confrontation weeks earlier, she had come to him looking anxious and troubled. Nathan was initially suspicious, unsure of what she wanted after everything that had happened. But Helena quickly made it clear that she was there to warn him. "My father's losing control," Helena said, her voice trembling. "He's doing things I've never seen him do before. He's desperate and he's planning something terrible. I don't know the full details, but he's going to come after you, Nathan. I can't let that happen." Nathan eyed her warily. "Why should I believe you, Helena? You've lied to me before." "I know I've made mistakes," she admitted, her eyes pleading. "But this isn't about us. It's about stopping my father before he does something unforgivable. He's not just going after your company, he's going after you and your family. I think he's planning to hurt you." Nathan could see the fear in Helena's eyes, and for the first time, he realized that she was genuinely afraid of her father. As much as he wanted to hate her for her past betrayals, he couldn't ignore the warning she was giving him now. If Trevor Wallace was planning to escalate the conflict to violence, Nathan needed to be ready. "Tell me everything you know," Nathan said, his voice calm but firm. "If you really want to help, you need to be honest with me." Helena nodded, relieved that Nathan was willing to listen. Over the next hour, she shared everything she knew about her father's recent actions: his meetings with shady figures, his desperate attempts to manipulate the courts, and the criminal elements he was turning to for help. It was worse than Nathan had feared. Trevor wasn't just trying to save his empire. He was planning to eliminate the Kingston family entirely. Armed with the information Helena had provided, Nathan knew they were now in a race against time. Trevor's plans were already in motion, and if they didn't act quickly, he could strike at any moment. Nathan immediately called a meeting with Mr. Donovan and their private security team. They discussed the possibility of going to the authorities, but without concrete evidence of Trevor's violent intentions, they would have little to go on. The lawsuits were one thing, but proving that Trevor was planning something more sinister would be difficult. Instead, they decided to ramp up their own investigations into Trevor's criminal connections. If they could find proof of his involvement with organized crime or any illegal activity, they could not only stop his attack but also destroy his empire once and for all. Nathan reached out to the private investigators who had already been working on gathering evidence against Trevor, instructing them to focus specifically on his connections to the underworld. Every second counted. Meanwhile, Nathan's family remained on high alert. Alexander Kingston, though furious and ready to fight, was also deeply concerned for his son's safety. He made it clear that they needed to protect themselves at all costs. "We can't let him win, Nathan," his father said. "But we need to be smart about this. We can't let our emotions get the best of us." Nathan nodded. He knew his father was right. As much as he wanted to take down Trevor Wallace himself, he couldn't afford to make any rash decisions. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about protecting his family and ensuring that Trevor's reign of terror ended once and for all. Days passed and tensions continued to rise. Nathan's investigators uncovered more evidence of Trevor's shady dealings, but they hadn't yet found the smoking gun they needed. Trevor, on the other hand, seemed to be growing more unhinged by the day. Rumors began to circulate that he had put a bounty on Nathan's head, offering a massive sum of money to anyone who could silence him or sabotage the Kingston family's business operations. Then the breaking point came. One evening, as Nathan was leaving his office, a car sped toward him, nearly running him off the road. His security team acted quickly, forcing the vehicle to stop, but the driver escaped before they could catch him. It was a clear assassination attempt, and there was no doubt in Nathan's mind who was behind it. Furious but shaken, Nathan returned to his family's estate and called an emergency meeting. "It's time to go to the authorities," he said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "We can't wait any longer. Trevor's coming after us and we need to stop him before he hurts someone else." His father agreed. The gloves were off. It was time to take Trevor Wallace down once and for all. Trevor Wallace was a man who thrived on control, and the more his empire unraveled, the more dangerous he became. The failed assassination attempt on Nathan only enraged him further. Trevor knew that the Kingston family was closing in on him, and he had to act fast before they brought his entire empire down. With his criminal connections ready to take action, Trevor decided to launch a multi-pronged attack, not just on Nathan but on the entire Kingston family. Trevor's next move was to sabotage Kingston Enterprises from the inside. Using his network of spies and informants, he identified a handful of key employees within Nathan's company who were vulnerable to bribery or coercion. Some were struggling with personal debts, others had hidden secrets they didn't want exposed. Trevor exploited these weaknesses, offering large sums of money or making threats to get them on his side. These insiders began feeding Trevor sensitive information about Kingston Enterprises' financial operations, ongoing projects, and upcoming deals. Armed with this information, Trevor orchestrated a series of targeted strikes. First, he spread false rumors about Kingston Enterprises' solvency, triggering a wave of panic among investors and causing the company's stock price to plummet. Then, he sabotaged key deals by bribing potential partners to back out at the last minute, costing the company millions. As chaos erupted within Kingston Enterprises, Trevor watched from the shadows, satisfied with the damage he was inflicting. But this wasn't enough for him. He wanted Nathan to suffer on a personal level too. Trevor knew Nathan's greatest vulnerability was his family. The Kingston name meant everything to Nathan and his father, Alexander, and if Trevor could strike at the heart of that, he would break them both. His plan was as cold-blooded as it was effective. He would target the Kingston's most beloved asset, their legacy. Trevor hired private investigators to dig up dirt on the Kingston's past, searching for any skeletons in the closet that could be used against them. What he found was a long-buried family scandal involving Nathan's grandfather, which, if exposed, could ruin the Kingston family's carefully cultivated image. Decades ago, Nathan's grandfather had been involved in a deal that, while technically legal, had devastated a small community, displacing hundreds of people. The Kingstons had covered it up, but Trevor now had the means to expose it publicly. With this information in hand, Trevor leaked the story to the media. Within days, headlines across the nation were plastered with accusations of corruption and greed, dragging the Kingston name through the mud. Reporters camped outside the Kingston estate demanding answers. Protesters, stirred up by the sensationalized media coverage, gathered outside Kingston Enterprises headquarters, accusing the family of exploiting the powerless for profit. Nathan watched helplessly as his family's legacy, which his father had spent decades building, crumbled in front of him. The public backlash was swift and brutal. Investors withdrew their support, longtime business partners distanced themselves, and the company's stock continued to nosedive. Worse still, Alexander Kingston, who had always been proud of his family's reputation, was devastated. Nathan could see the toll it was taking on his father, who had aged visibly in just a few short weeks. Trevor's attack on the family was working, but he wasn't finished yet. While the media firestorm raged, Trevor set his sights on something even more personal: Nathan's relationship with his younger brother Ethan. Ethan, who had always been close to Nathan, was also involved in the family business, though he had never been as prominent as Nathan in the public eye. Trevor saw an opportunity to exploit the sibling bond and turn them against each other. Through his insiders, Trevor planted false information in Ethan's ear, suggesting that Nathan had been making decisions behind his back, decisions that could cost the company and their family millions. Ethan, already feeling sidelined in Nathan's rise to power, began to doubt his brother's leadership. Trevor fueled these insecurities, making Ethan question whether Nathan was truly acting in the family's best interest or if he was motivated by his personal vendetta against the Wallaces. Nathan, focused on fighting Trevor and saving his company, failed to notice the growing rift between him and his brother. It wasn't until one evening after a particularly tense board meeting that Ethan confronted Nathan. "You're so consumed with revenge, Nathan, that you're not thinking clearly," Ethan said, his voice filled with frustration. "All of these lawsuits, the media circus, it's tearing the family apart. Are you even thinking about what's best for us anymore, or is this just about you?" Nathan was stunned by his brother's words. He had always assumed they were on the same page, fighting the same battle. "I'm doing this for the family, Ethan," Nathan said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Everything I've done has been to protect what we've built." Ethan shook his head. "I don't think so. You've been so focused on Trevor that you've lost sight of everything else. And now look at us. Our reputation is in shambles, the company's falling apart, and Dad is barely hanging on." The argument between the brothers escalated, with Nathan accusing Ethan of not understanding the gravity of the situation, and Ethan accusing Nathan of putting his personal vendetta ahead of their family's legacy. Trevor's plan to divide the Kingstons was working. The family was fracturing under the pressure, and Nathan found himself more isolated than ever. As Nathan dealt with the internal strife in his family, Trevor made his next move, sending a final, ominous warning. Nathan received another anonymous message, this time in the form of a video. The footage showed a group of armed men gathered in a dimly lit room, discussing their plans to eliminate the problem. Nathan's heart sank as he realized the problem they were referring to was him. The message was clear. Trevor was preparing to escalate the conflict to violence once again, this time with more precision. He wasn't just after Nathan's business or reputation. He wanted Nathan out of the picture for good. The video ended with a chilling statement: "You have 48 hours to withdraw the lawsuits and back off, or we come for you and your family." Nathan showed the video to his father and Mr. Donovan, who both agreed that they couldn't ignore the threat any longer. It was time to bring in the authorities. But Nathan also knew that they were running out of time. Trevor was cornered, and a cornered animal was always the most dangerous. Nathan clenched his fists, his mind racing. Trevor Wallace had crossed every line, and now there was no turning back. But as much as Nathan wanted to fight, he also knew he had to protect his family at all costs. They couldn't afford to wait for Trevor's next move. The time had come to take the fight directly to him, before it was too late. Nathan knew he had reached a breaking point. Trevor's latest threat was not just a warning, it was a declaration of war. As he sat in his office, the weight of the decision before him pressed down like a physical burden. His family's legacy, his own safety, and now the lives of those closest to him were all at risk. The video message from Trevor's hired mercenaries left no room for doubt. If Nathan didn't act fast, Trevor would resort to violence and the Kingston family could be destroyed. His first instinct was to fight back hard, to counter Trevor's threat with a bold move of his own. But Nathan realized he couldn't afford to make a rash decision fueled by anger. The stakes were too high. He needed to outsmart Trevor, not just overpower him. Nathan gathered his father, Mr. Donovan, and the head of their private security team for an urgent meeting. "We have 48 hours, Nathan began, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. Trevor's desperate and that makes him dangerous. We can't ignore the threat, but we also can't back down. This ends now, but we have to be smart about it. Mr. Donovan nodded. We can bring in the authorities, but we need more than just this video. We need concrete evidence of his involvement in organized crime and his direct connection to these mercenaries. I agree, Nathan said. But we don't have time to wait for a full investigation. Trevor's already made his move, and we need to act before he strikes again. The head of security, a former military officer named Grayson, spoke up. We can strengthen the security around the estate and your offices, but if Trevor has hired professionals, we need to take the offensive. We can set a trap for them, draw them out and catch them before they make their move. Nathan considered Grayson's suggestion. A trap might be risky, but it could also buy them time and give them leverage against Trevor. How do we do it? Nathan asked. We'll leak false information to Trevor through one of his informants. Make him believe you'll be vulnerable at a certain time and place, Grayson explained. Once his men show up, we'll be ready for them. Capture them, and we can extract information that ties them directly to Trevor. It was a dangerous plan, but Nathan knew it might be their best shot. He agreed, and they set the wheels in motion. The following day, Nathan and Grayson's team worked quickly to implement the plan. They fed a false rumor through one of the informants Trevor had planted within Kingston Enterprises, suggesting that Nathan would be attending a private meeting at an isolated warehouse on the outskirts of town, an ideal location for a hit. While the trap was being set, Nathan made sure to prepare his family. He had a difficult conversation with his father, who insisted on staying involved despite the danger. This fight is mine too, Nathan, Alexander said firmly. Trevor hurt you, but he's attacked our entire family. We stand together. Nathan respected his father's determination, but he made sure that additional security was placed around the Kingston estate and that his brother Ethan, who was still reeling from their argument, was kept safe. Nathan realized the rift between him and Ethan was another weapon Trevor had used against him, but there was no time to fix it now. For the moment, keeping Ethan out of harm's way was the priority. As the day of the trap approached, Nathan's nerves were on edge. Every detail had been planned meticulously, but the risk remained high. If something went wrong, Trevor's men could slip through their fingers or worse, retaliate in a deadly way. But Nathan knew they couldn't afford to wait for Trevor's next move. The clock was ticking, and the longer they delayed, the more dangerous the situation became.